Late spring, 1987. Fannin County, Georgia. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, a sweetness that clung to the hollows long after the morning fog burned off. It was a place of old rhythms, of seasons turning in their proper order. A place where the lines were drawn straight. Property lines, furrow lines, fence lines. Especially fence lines. A straight fence was the mark of a good farmer, a clear mind, an orderly life. It was a testament to dominion, a straight-edged rule laid down upon the unruly curves of the Appalachian foothills. A straight fence spoke a language everyone understood. It said, "This is mine." It said, "I am in control." It said, "I know what I am doing." Evelyn Ainsworth knew this. She was 58 years old, a widow of 2 years, and she had lived on that same 90-acre parcel of land her entire life. She had watched her father build the straight fences, and she had watched her husband Thomas maintain them. Thomas had been a master of the straight line. His fences were legendary in the county, tight as a banjo string, posts set so perfectly you could sight down a quarter-mile of them and see only the first one. They were built of creosote-treated pine and 5 strands of red brand 12.5-gauge high-tensile barbed wire. They were, by every local standard, perfect, and Evelyn Ainsworth was tearing them down. The work began in April, just as the dogwoods started to bloom, their white blossoms like ghosts in the undergrowth. She did not hire a crew. She did not ask for help from her neighbors. She used Thomas's old Ford F-150, a faded blue relic with a stubborn clutch and a length of heavy chain. She hitched the chain to the base of each pine post, a post her husband had set with a gas-powered auger and tamped firm with his own 2 hands. She put the truck in low gear, and with a groan of metal and a scream of protesting wood, she pulled them from the earth. One by one, post by perfect post. The wire she coiled by hand, her leather-gloved fingers tracing the barbs Thomas had so carefully strung. She stacked the old posts in a neat pile behind the barn, a funeral pyre for a lifetime of straight thinking. The men of the county had one word for it: grief. It was the only explanation that made any sense. Thomas was a good man, a respected man. His absence was a hole in the fabric of the community. A woman alone, they reasoned, might do strange things. Grief could make a person crooked, and so, it seemed, grief was making her fences crooked. They saw it as a temporary madness, a fever of sorrow that would eventually break. They talked about it at the co-op in Blue Ridge, their voices low over bags of feed and fertilizer. They discussed it in the parking lot of the Morganton Baptist Church after Sunday service. They speculated over coffee and burnt eggs at the Toccoa River restaurant. Had she lost her mind? Was she selling the place? Was she just letting it all go? Because what she was building in place of those perfect straight fences was an abomination, an offense against geometry and common sense. She was not clearing a new straight line with a bulldozer. She was not rolling out survey maps. Her tools were elemental, almost primitive. An A-frame level made of scrap lumber and a plumb bob. Her own 2 eyes, an almost unnerving patience, and a deep, quiet understanding of the land that no one else could fathom. She walked the property for weeks, not on the ridges or the easy paths, but in the subtle dips and swales, the places where the water wanted to go. She followed the almost invisible contours of the land, the lines etched not by man, but by millennia of rainfall. She marked her path with little flags of torn red cloth tied to saplings, and the resulting line looked like the meandering of a drunken snake. It wound and bucked and curved. It respected no property line, no cardinal direction. It obeyed only the logic of the slope, a logic she alone seemed to hear. Then came the posts. She did not buy new creosote posts from the supply store. She drove her Ford deep into the woods, into the thickets along the creek beds, places most people avoided. She was harvesting her own. Osage orange and black locust, the two hardest, most rot-resistant woods in the forest. The old-timers called Osage orange Bodark, a corruption of Bois d'Arc, the wood the French trappers saw Native Americans use for their bows. It was a miserable tree to work with, thorny, dense, with a grain that fought every saw. Black locust was just as stubborn, a wood so durable it was said you could set a post and the post would outlast the hole. For 2 months the sound of her chainsaw echoed in the valley. A woman's work, they whispered. And yet she felled the trees herself. She bucked the logs, and using a system of cant hooks and sheer grit, loaded them onto the bed of the old Ford. Back at the barn, she stripped the bark with a draw knife, the bright yellow of the Osage orange, and the pale greenish white of the locust, gleaming in the sun. She let them season, stacking them in a way that allowed the air to move around them, a slow, deliberate curing. The pile grew, a dragon's hoard of gnarled, twisted, impossibly heavy wood. Each post was a character. None was straight, none was uniform. They were as crooked and individual as the line she intended to build. The cost, in dollars, was minimal. Some gasoline for the truck and the chainsaw, a few new files for sharpening the chain, a box of staples. The real cost was measured in sweat, in muscle, in solitude, and in the steady erosion of her standing in the community. What was once pity for her loss was curdling into something else: concern, annoyance, ridicule. The men at the co-op stopped speculating and started laughing. They called them her drunken fences, her grief fences, her crazy woman squiggles. The laughter was not overtly cruel, not to her face. It was the easy, confident laughter of men who knew how the world worked, who knew the right way to do things. A straight line was the shortest distance between 2 points. It was efficient. It maximized pasture. It was how things were done. It was how they had always been done. Evelyn's new fences were the opposite of efficient. They used more posts per 100 feet than a straight fence. They used more wire. The curves created awkward, unusable corners of land, little triangles of thistle and broom sedge that a tractor couldn't reach. Mowing the fence line, a standard chore for keeping down weeds and brush, would become a nightmare of maneuvering. From a purely economic, purely modern farming perspective, it was financial suicide. It was a deliberate, willful act of inefficiency. Dale Lunsford, the Fannin County Extension agent, was the first official to pay a visit. He was a young man, fresh out of the agricultural program at the University of Georgia, full of zeal for soil testing, crop rotation, and government pamphlets. He drove a white, county-issue Chevrolet Celebrity, and he arrived with a clipboard and a look of deep professional concern. He found Evelyn tamping dirt around a particularly gnarled Osage orange post, her face smudged with grime, her hands caked in red Georgia clay. He explained, in a patient, slightly patronizing tone, the principles of modern pasture management. He spoke of maximizing grazing area, of ease of access for equipment, of property values. He unrolled a plat map of her property on the hood of his Chevrolet, its neat, straight lines a stark contrast to the winding row of posts behind him. He pointed out how her new fence deviated from the legally surveyed boundary. She listened, without speaking, her eyes on the map, then on the land. She nodded, a slow, deliberate motion that conveyed neither agreement nor disagreement. She simply listened. When he was finished, she thanked him for his time. She offered him a glass of iced tea. She did not explain herself. She did not defend her methods. She just turned back to her work, tamping the earth around the crooked post until it was set as solid as a mountain. Dale Lunsford drove away, baffled. He wrote in his report that Mr. Ainsworth's widow was engaged in highly unconventional fencing practices with no discernible agricultural benefit. He concluded that it was likely a psychological response to bereavement and recommended no official action, for now. He believed, as everyone did, that she would eventually come to her senses. She did not. Through the heat of June and July, she worked. The sun beat down, turning the clay to brick. She dug the post holes by hand, with a manual auger and a post hole digger. The twin handles worn smooth by her husband's hands, and now her own. The digging was brutal. The ground was riddled with rock and root. Some holes took an hour, some took half a day. She set the posts deep, 3 feet into the ground, and anchored the corner posts with massive H-braces, each one a sculpture of interlocking locust logs. Then she strung the wire, 5 strands of new, gleaming red brand. Stretching it around the gentle curves was a slow, painstaking process. She used a come-along and a wire stretcher, anchoring them to the truck's trailer hitch, coaxing the wire into place. She worked with a focused, methodical intensity that was unnerving to watch. There was no wasted motion. Every action had a purpose, even if the grand purpose was utterly insane to every soul who watched. By August, the first section was complete. It ran for nearly half a mile, from the county road down to the creek, a long, sinuous spine of wood and wire laid across the landscape. It looked alive. It looked like it had grown there. And it looked, to the people of Fannin County, utterly and completely wrong. The second official visit was from the County Zoning Commission. 2 men in a dusty Ford Crown Victoria, both wearing string ties and expressions of weary authority. They had received a complaint. An anonymous complaint, they said, though Evelyn knew it could have come from any one of a dozen neighbors. The complaint cited County Ordinance 7B4, a vague rule about fences being constructed in a manner consistent with community standards and established property lines. They pointed at the plat map. They pointed at her fence. They pointed out the discrepancies. The fence, they explained, created a boundary ambiguity. It could confuse future surveyors. It could lead to disputes. And, they added, it was an eyesore. It lowered the tone of the area. It was not, they said, how things were done in Fannin County. They gave her a formal warning, a notice printed on official letterhead ordering her to cease construction and bring her existing fence into compliance with the surveyed property lines. She had 30 days. After that, there would be fines. $25 a day. Evelyn folded the letter and put it in the pocket of her work shirt. She thanked the men for their time. She did not argue. She did not explain. As their car disappeared down her driveway in a cloud of dust, she picked up her hammer and a pocketful of staples and went back to work on the fence. The 30 days passed. The fines began to accumulate. The letters from the county, once polite warnings, became stern demands. The sum grew. $25, $50, $100. It became a running joke at the courthouse. The widow Ainsworth's crooked fence fund. Her isolation deepened. The friendly waves from passing trucks became less frequent. The invitations to covered dish suppers stopped coming. She was no longer just a grieving widow. She was a problem. A stubborn old woman defying the county, defying her neighbors, defying logic itself. Her 90 acres became an island of eccentricity in a sea of conformity. People drove by her property slowly, pointing, shaking their heads. They brought their visiting relatives to see the crazy fences. It was a local curiosity, a cautionary tale about what happens when a person lets go. But Evelyn was not letting go. She was holding on. She was holding on to a memory, not of her husband, but of her grandfather. He had been a farmer of the old school, a man who had worked the land before tractors, before chemical fertilizers, before the gospel of the straight line had been so thoroughly preached by agricultural universities. He had been a watcher. He had taught her to read the land, to see the stories it told. He had shown her how a deer trail always finds the easiest slope, how a stand of ferns indicates a seep spring, how the color of the soil changes with its capacity to hold water. He had taught her that water was life, and that the great trick of farming in the hills was not to fight the water, not to rush it off your land in straight ditches, but to coax it, to slow it down, to make it stay a while. "The water is a guest," he used to say. "You have to make it feel welcome." She was also holding on to her own observations. For 58 years she had watched this land. She had seen how the rain fell, not uniformly, but in sheets and torrents that exploited every weakness in the soil. She had seen the flash floods that followed a summer thunderstorm, turning the creek into a brown, churning monster that carried away tons of precious topsoil from her neighbors' overgrazed, straight-lined pastures. She had seen the gullies forming, the slow bleeding of the land's vitality. She had seen the springs that her grandfather knew begin to run dry in the late summer. Her husband, Thomas, for all his skill with a fence stretcher, had been a man of the new school. He believed in the plat map. He believed in the power of the machine. He had seen the curves of the land as an inconvenience to be overcome, not a wisdom to be consulted. His straight fences cut across the natural flow lines, and in the small, almost imperceptible ways that add up over decades, they had made things worse. They created channels for the water to speed up, to gather force, to erode. Evelyn had seen it, but she had held her peace. It was his farm, his way. Now it was her farm, her way. The fences were not random. They were a system. Each post was set on a key line, a specific topographical point where the slope of the hill changes from convex to concave. A fence built along this line acted as a subtle dam. It didn't stop the water, but it slowed it. The water, carrying its load of sediment and organic matter, would pause along the uphill side of the fence, dropping its precious cargo and, more importantly, sinking into the ground. Each sinuous curve was designed to catch water, to spread it, to hold it. She was, in her own quiet way, rehydrating the landscape. She was building a 90-acre sponge. She finished the last section of fence in the autumn of 1987. The property was now entirely enclosed by her strange, flowing lines of wood and wire. The fines from the county had reached over $1,000. She had not paid a cent. She received a summons to appear in court. The courtroom in Blue Ridge was small and smelled of floor polish and old paper. It was not a trial, but a hearing. Evelyn sat alone on a wooden bench. The county commissioners sat at a large table. Dale Lunsford, the extension agent, was there, looking uncomfortable. A few of her neighbors had come to watch, their faces a mixture of curiosity and disapproval. The commissioners presented their case: the violation of the ordinance, the unpaid fines, the complaints. They spoke of the importance of order, of respecting property lines, of maintaining community standards. They were not unkind. They were simply stating the facts as they saw them. They asked her once again for an explanation. Evelyn stood up. She was not a tall woman, and she was dressed in simple work clothes. She looked at the commissioners, at her neighbors, at Dale Lunsford. She had no maps, no charts, no scientific data. She had only the knowledge in her hands and the conviction in her heart. She spoke for less than a minute. Her voice was quiet, but it filled the small room. She said the land was thirsty. She said the straight lines were bleeding it dry. She said she was just giving the water a place to rest. The courtroom was silent. No one knew what to make of it. It sounded like poetry, not farming. It was the explanation of a mystic, not a property owner. The commissioners conferred. They were practical men. They saw a stubborn woman, a pile of fines, and a fence that made no sense. They found her in violation. They ordered her to pay the fines and to remove the fence. They gave her 6 months. Evelyn Ainsworth walked out of the courthouse, got into her old Ford truck, and drove home. She did not remove the fence. She did not pay the fines. She began to prepare for winter. She knew that the real judgment would not be delivered in a courtroom. It would be delivered by the land itself. The winter was mild, but the spring of 1988 was dry. The April showers never came. May was dry. June was a furnace. By July, the word drought was on everyone's lips. It was not a gentle drought, but a vicious, aggressive one. The sun was a hammer. The sky was a pale, bleached-out blue. The pastures of Fannin County, normally lush and green, turned a sickly yellow, then a brittle, dusty brown. The straight-lined farms began to suffer first. The shallow-rooted fescue and orchard grass withered. The earth, baked hard by the sun, cracked open in patterns like broken pottery. When the occasional teasing thunderstorm did arrive, it was a curse, not a blessing. The rain was violent, and the hard-baked ground could not absorb it. The water ran off in muddy sheets, carrying away what little topsoil was left, carving deeper gullies, leaving the land even more impoverished than before. The price of hay, trucked in from states that still had rain, skyrocketed. Farmers who had laughed at Evelyn's fences were now forced to sell off their cattle, their faces grim as they loaded their breeding stock onto trailers bound for the slaughterhouse. The creeks slowed to a trickle, then stopped, leaving behind stinking pools of stagnant water. Wells that had never failed began to run dry. The rhythm of the county, once so steady, was broken. The confidence was gone, replaced by a quiet, gnawing anxiety. But on Evelyn Ainsworth's 90 acres, something different was happening. It was not a miracle. It was not immune to the drought. Her grass was not as green as it would have been in a wet year, but it was green. While her neighbors' fields were brown and silent, her pastures held a soft, resilient color. There was a difference in the air itself. The morning dew, which had vanished from the rest of the county, still settled on her fields, a faint silvering that caught the first rays of the sun. Her crooked fences were working. Every time one of those violent, localized thunderstorms hit, the system she had built performed its quiet task. The water, instead of rushing off the land, was caught by the winding fence lines. It pooled in shallow, temporary reservoirs, spreading out, slowing down. The thirsty earth drank it in. The water table, which was dropping all over the county, was being replenished on her property. The soil along her fences was dark and moist. The grass there was thick and deep green, and that health radiated out into the rest of the pasture. Her cattle, smaller in number than her husband had kept, but of excellent stock, grazed contentedly. She did not have to buy hay. She had enough stockpiled, and her fields were still producing, slowly but surely. Her well remained full. Her creek, while low, still trickled with clear, clean water. People began to notice. At first, they didn't understand what they were seeing. They drove past and saw the impossible, a patch of green in a world of brown. They attributed it to luck, a freak spring under her land, a different type of soil. Any explanation was better than the truth, because the truth was too unsettling. The truth would mean that they were all wrong, and the crazy old woman was right. Dale Lunsford, the extension agent, was the one who began to understand. His job now consisted of driving from one ruined farm to another, offering what little advice and comfort he could. He drove past Evelyn's place every day, and the contrast became too stark to ignore. One hot afternoon in August, he pulled his Chevrolet Celebrity into her driveway. He was not there to talk about ordinances or community standards. He was not carrying a clipboard. He found her sitting on her porch, shucking corn. She offered him a glass of water from her well. It was cold and sweet. He took it, and he asked her. He just asked. How? Evelyn stopped her work. She looked out at her land, at the gentle, life-giving curves of her fences. And for the first time, she explained. She didn't talk about poetry or mysticism. She talked about hydrology. She talked about topsoil and infiltration rates. She talked about the convex and concave slopes. She used the old words her grandfather had taught her, and the new words she had read in dusty books on soil conservation she'd ordered through the mail. She walked him down to one of the fences and had him dig his hands into the soil on the uphill side. It was cool and damp and teeming with worms. 10 feet away, on her neighbor's property, the ground was hot, dry, and as hard as concrete. She showed him how the fence wasn't just a barrier for cattle, but a tool for farming water. A passive irrigation system powered by gravity and rainfall. A way to build soil instead of losing it. She explained that the awkward, unusable corners he had once criticized were now becoming the richest parts of her land, catching nutrients and moisture, exploding with biodiversity. Wildflowers and clover grew there, attracting pollinators. Quail and rabbits found shelter in the dense growth. Section Dale Lunsford listened. He was a scientist, a man trained to believe in data and evidence. And the evidence was all around him. It was in the color of the grass, the moisture in the soil, the health of the cattle. He had spent years telling farmers to fight the land, to straighten it, to control it. And here was a woman who had succeeded by listening to it, by cooperating with its natural tendencies. He had been looking at her fences as a problem of geometry. He now saw they were a solution of ecology. He spent the rest of the afternoon with her. He took notes. He took soil samples. He drove back to his office with a sense of awe and profound intellectual humility. He had come to Fannin County to teach, and he had just received the most important lesson of his life. The drought of '88 did not break. It held on through '89 and '90, a slow, grinding disaster that reshaped the agricultural economy of North Georgia. The landscape was scarred. The county's tax base dwindled as farms failed. The beautiful Toccoa River was running lower than anyone could remember, its waters cloudy with eroded sediment. The county commissioners, the same men who had fined Evelyn Ainsworth, were now facing a crisis of their own making. They were spending thousands of dollars on futile erosion control measures, building check dams in gullies that were already hopelessly deep. Dale Lunsford wrote a report. It was a bold, almost heretical document. It detailed his observations of the Ainsworth fencing system. He used terms like keyline design and water harvesting. He compared the soil composition, water retention, and forage productivity of Evelyn's farm with 5 neighboring properties. The data was stark. Her farm was not just surviving the drought. In some ways, it was thriving. It was becoming more resilient, more fertile. He concluded that her crooked fences were not a violation of community standards, but a potential salvation for the county's agricultural future. He recommended that the county immediately drop all fines against her and instead fund a pilot program to teach her methods to other farmers. The report was met with skepticism, then resistance. The commissioners were old-school farmers themselves. The idea was too radical. It went against everything they had ever been taught. And there was the pride. Admitting she was right meant admitting they, and generations before them, had been wrong. But the drought was relentless. The crisis was deepening. They were running out of other options. In the spring of 1991, a small delegation of county officials and prominent farmers visited Evelyn's farm. It was a formal, arranged tour. Dale Lunsford led it, but Evelyn did the talking. She walked them along her fences. She showed them the results. She answered their questions with quiet, irrefutable facts. They saw the deep grass. They felt the cool, damp soil. They saw her healthy cattle. They saw her full pond. They saw a system that worked. The change was not sudden. It was a slow, grudging turn, like a great ship coming about. But it turned. The fines were quietly dropped. The ordinance was reviewed. Conversations at the co-op began to change. The laughter was gone, replaced by a grudging respect, then genuine curiosity. Farmers who had once mocked her started stopping by, their hats in their hands, asking questions. She always welcomed them. She shared what she knew freely, without a hint of resentment or triumphalism. The pilot program was approved in 1992. It was a small affair, funded by a modest grant from the State Soil and Water Conservation District that Dale Lunsford had fought to secure. They asked Evelyn if she would lead a workshop, teach other farmers how to see the land the way she did, how to build the fences. She said yes. The first workshop was held in the fall of 1993. The location was the Fannin County Courthouse, in the same small courtroom where she had been fined and ordered to tear down her life's most important work. The room was packed. Farmers stood in the back, their arms crossed, their faces weathered and skeptical. But they were there. They were listening. Evelyn Ainsworth stood before them, not with a gavel or a law book, but with an A-frame level in one hand and a handful of rich, dark soil from her pasture in the other. She began to speak. She spoke of water, of soil, of life. She spoke of listening to the land. She was not just teaching them how to build a fence. She was teaching them how to see. And that is how a woman who was once an outcast, an object of ridicule, a crazy widow, became a teacher. That is how the county that tried to fine her for her crooked fences ended up paying her to show them the way. It's a story about fences, yes, but it's more than that. It's a story about a different kind of line, not the straight line of arrogance, but the curved line of wisdom. To really understand what she did, you have to go back. You have to understand the land as she found it, the man who shaped it before her, and the deep, quiet knowledge that gave her the courage to draw a new line, a better line, upon the earth. Let me show you what her husband Thomas built. Let me show you the world of straight lines she so bravely tore down. Let me take you back to the beginning of the end of that world, to a perfect fence on a perfect farm, and the first signs of the thirst that would change everything. The story of her defiance is written in every post she set, every strand of wire she pulled. It's a story that starts not with a crooked fence, but with a straight one, and the slow, dawning realization of its terrible cost. We need to walk that straight fence line first, feel the hard, dry ground beneath our feet, and understand the world she was trying to save. One crooked, beautiful, brilliant fence at a time.